Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to this extraordinary and unusual council meeting. Unusual in the sense that we're doing it at 1 p.m, which I don't remember ever having done, but anyway. Can I ask Councillor O'Brien to open us up with a karakia, please? I'll start with the meeting notices. So live streaming, council and standing committee meetings are live streamed on the council's website and YouTube channel. Public gallery attendees' presence implies your consent to being broadcast. Further information about live streaming protocols can be found on council's website. Health and safety, in case of emergency, follow the building wardens to the nearest exit, which are all marked. The meeting point is across the road at Peace Park behind me, and bathroom facilities are located opposite the chamber foyer, out that way. Apologies, I have none recorded. Acknowledgements. Does anybody have any acknowledgements or tributes? Councillor Boynton.
I just wanted to acknowledge the event that was this morning regarding the council staff, the kotahitanga event, and just the celebration of the hard work that council staff have done throughout the year. And it was really great to see the different members. We often see their names, but we don't often get to see their faces. So I just wanted to acknowledge the teams within the council itself. Kia ora.
Thank you. Conflicts of interest. Do members have any conflicts of interest to declare related to any of the business we're about to conduct today? Nope. Good. We're in the reports section, so I expect that this meeting will probably take less than 2 hours, but we'll see how we go. There are only 1.5 items on the agenda. So the first report is the annual plan 2025-26 draft budget options. Pages 10 to 19 of the agenda. And I will ask our CFO to run us through it, or Steve. Yep.
Kia ora mea, Victor, and kia ora tātou councillors. This is the annual plan budget. We're not in a position to provide a comprehensive draft budget at this stage to council. Just a number of delays, LTP, then annual report, and that's having flow-on effects to the rest of our business. But what we're looking at doing is having the comprehensive budget ready, draft budget ready for a February meeting with council. However, we've had some early indications that we may find some savings in the budget. There's a few things we're looking at. That's positive, and out of this meeting and annual plan paper, it would be really useful if we could have some sort of guidance from council around, if we did have some savings, how it might like to apply those savings into the council business, or whether that goes off rates. We're also trying our best to provide information in different ways to really help inform the community and councillors about various things, and ensuring people have got a clear understanding and information in order to make the best decisions they possibly can. In today's annual plan paper, we've tried a different way of presenting the operating deficit that council is currently in. We're not unique in New Zealand. All councils, well, not all, a lot of councils in New Zealand are currently in this position related to holding rates or deferring rates increases post-COVID. That's now caught up to us, and we're all operating, and most of us are operating in operating deficits. Ironically, central government is also in an operating deficit and going to be there until 2029, which is around about the same period as we currently are, which is interesting. But we've presented this picture. Bevan and the finance team have pulled it together, really to give a sense of, some of the things that have led up to where we are currently today and the decisions made in the long-term plan around taking the 6-year option to gradually move ourselves back towards a balanced budget or even potentially an operating surplus instead of an operating deficit. And if you wanted to roughly calculate the area of the triangle, you can just go through those mathematical processes. I had a crack. It's roughly about $70 million of debt in order to fund our operating deficits over a 10-year period. We haven't put a definitive number of what the size of that debt is required over that 10-year period because things change over time and it's very, very hard to be confident about a specific number. But I think, you can sort of look at the triangle and calculate what the area of the triangle would be anyway to give yourself an indication. But nevertheless, it's still, a reasonably big number. I'll just hand over to Bevan if Bevan wants to make any technical comments on the paper.
Thank you. Just to highlight that the chart, it is similar but not quite the same as the one that was presented in the LTP and the one that Philip presented last week, because those two charts had subsidies in it, which kind of complicated it. So what I've done is removed the subsidies to give us a true look at what the operating impacts of post-COVID and some of those decisions around artificially keeping rates low and where they've got us. So the red lines I've put in there are kind of decision points or outside influences on the organisation. So you've got COVID that hit, then we had a process in when we set the 21 to 31 LTP, we actually smoothed rates, which means year one rates were lower than what they needed to be. Then we started to see the cost increases that came as a result of post-COVID cost escalations. And, we can all remember the 2024 annual plan process where we were in a deficit position. We didn't have time to review the fees and charges, and so the fees and charge process was deferred 6 months. So, this is all starting to accumulate, and then the most recent LTP, we had the Fund the Gap proposal, which went to the community to seek how long the community would like to repay that. The resounding results back was 6 years, but I think we're possibly making decisions in the absence of what is the real impact. So this is, as Steve mentioned, it's probably about $17 million that we've in a deficit position or borrowed to fund essentially operating costs. So I think the point of that chart is to give you a bit of a steer around where we are at now and what you think is important as we go through the annual plan process and looking at the options around what we do. Are we aiming to try and get back to the green a lot quicker? So I guess what Steve and I are saying is we're having a look in our new roles with a fresh set of eyes, and we've lifted the carpet to have a look what's under there, and we're trying to provide you the very real situation around the deficits we're operating in. So the other element of it, it's from the LTP, it's $50 million of additional debt funded over 25 years as well. So it's not short-term debt. And when you think about it, who benefits from these decisions? So should it be the people in the year 20 still paying for operating deficits? So I think we need to be looking at how we're funding those shortfalls. A number of the impacts also were outside of our control or control of the council or the organisation. COVID, for example, cost escalations. Most of these are past, but we're still going to be carrying the burden of those for the next 25 years. So I think, the opportunity is here right now to discuss what's needed to get back to green. I've done some back of the envelope calculations. It would relate to almost a 26% rates rise next year to get back to the green. So that's an additional 13% on top of what we agreed, which is about 9.4 million.
Thank you. Any further comments, Steve? Were you happy?
No, I'm happy.
The floor's open for questions.
0.4 million.
Oh, well, might as well start off. So Steve mentioned approximately $70 million is the integral, what's underneath that triangular bit, which has changed a bit from before. Is that about right?
Yeah, the number we have certainty of is the number that was agreed in the LTP. So it's the bottom of the triangle to when we pay it off.
Right.
The rest of it is just really an estimate based on historic decisions and how we've kept rates artificially low. I can't quantify that one exactly, but what we do know is the 50.
Right. So once we get back into balance, so that revenue and expenditure are balanced, does that mean we've still got $70 million roughly to pay off?
Yeah.
And how is it that we propose to do? I mean, that means we'll still be incurring financing costs over that going forward on that $70 million.
Yeah.
And is that just for operating? Yeah, so we've still got other.
Yeah.
Because during the long-term plan process, I think I used the number $8 million in financing costs for year one of the LTP and 18 by the 10th year. Is that about right? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think it was about 7 million of capex would have a 1% rates increase. So yeah, kind of aligns to the 8.
So we do still have that problem anyway. All right, thank you for that. Further questions? Okay. Yeah, I think oh, Wilson, yep, carry on.
So, if we just keep doing what we're doing, Bevan, we're just offloading costs onto future generations forever and ever. Never getting on top of it, which is what we've been arguing for some time. So, and I mean, it is alarming that in the last 3 years, our debt has significantly increased, mainly because we keep borrowing to keep rates down. So we're on a hiding to nowhere, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, through the LTP process, we resolved that we would get back to green over 6 years. So try and fund this operating deficit over the 6-year period because, that's trying to manage the rates increases. All manner of things could change within the next 5 years, which means we might continue to borrow. It's always a balancing decision or balancing act around do you raise rates to fund the costs that we're incurring or do you borrow? And it's like purchasing goods on credit card, but we're not paying the credit card off for 25 years. We're not paying it off in 1 year, it's 25 years. So that's the kind of situation we're in, and unless you reduce levels of service and associated expenditure or find other revenue sources, it's very difficult to balance the budget. So the default is obviously debt.
So the opportunity at the moment is to keep debt to a minimum because we don't know what debt we may need to incur over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think the direction we're seeking here is, at a principled level, do we want to almost go against the recommendation to get back to the green over 6 years because of the long-term impacts of it, and try and deal with the deficit sooner rather than later? Because if you can deal with that and deal with how quickly you repay those loans, then the organisation and the community's in a better place.
Yeah, exactly.
Councillor Dennis?
So the two options you mentioned were that we pay the debt back faster, or that we reduce the rate slightly, right? Is that what you're saying, that about to get back to zero? I'd like to put up something slightly different, in that if I look at the news these days, I see that our retirees are finding it hard and harder to eat. I find that the young couples with children are finding it more and more difficult to survive. People can't pay their rents. I see that that the government's just borrowed $20 billion. GDP this morning went down 1% for this month, and they're estimating another 1.1% next month. They've officially said we're going into another recession. I think we need to really take the hard step and say, maybe we actually need to take a look at this thing. We need to pause Rex Morpeth Park now that the building's waterproof. We need to pause Mitchell Park. We need to pause a Hopi Wharf do-up.
Councillor, can we just have questions for now, and we'll do that in the debate section? Are you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I was actually.
Oh, okay, carry on.
Is it possible for us to look at pausing a lot of that stuff, and even more, and take a hard look at things to actually reduce our expenditure and cut out the vibrancy stuff, and concentrate on making life affordable for people and also reduce debt at the same time? Because my concern is that if we don't, we aren't going to have our great-grandchildren around here in future enjoy what we do because they can't afford to be here. So is it possible to relook at that, please? That's my question there.
Yeah, yes, Councillor Dennis, it is. I think the solution is, as you've described, a combination of things to gradually move us back to a balanced budget or an operating surplus. One of the things I've noticed is that when councils, because I was on a different council post-COVID, when councils were deferring rates, keeping them artificially low, accepting that there was probably financial hardship in a lot of households, it wasn't saying in its council reports, we're going to keep those rates low and then cut services in the future. It was saying we're going to keep the rates low for now and we're going to come back to you when we're all in a much better financial position. And unfortunately, that better financial position didn't eventuate. We got hit by very high inflation, high interest rates, and it escalated the problem even further. It became exponential, actually. We've had some presentations and we've heard some stuff in the media about, well, it's just about cutting staff. And actually, it's not. I think that there are some things we can do to perhaps trim things, and that's what Bevan has alluded to. We can certainly have another look at our FTE. We're going to come back and do that with councillors in early February next year. We can look at some efficiencies in the business. We've already started to do that in the paper. But I think people need to accept that a large proportion of getting us back into that green space is about catching up on rates.
I never ever went down that angle of borrowing to keep the rates down. I don't believe in that. I've never believed in debt. It's a stranglehold for every organisation. I believed in pausing the vibrancy stuff to lessen the spend. And I know we'll never be able to afford it, but at the moment we're going to by supposedly, so that's what I meant by that, not borrowing.
So can I just ask what the biggest contributors to the operating deficit are? Or the biggest, the parameter that you can move the most to get it, to reduce it?
Deferring, keeping rates artificially low. So not charging the rate that you need to charge in order to fund the services that council is providing. That would be the largest contributor.
That's it. That is the contributor. So instead of raising rates by 25%, we've chosen to raise them by 12 or, over the past. So if you raise them by that amount, you don't have a deficit position. So the 100% contributing factor to it is the appetite not to raise rates or to artificially keep them low. So we've got to operate a balanced budget, and if you don't have the revenue to balance the budget, it's got to be debt.
Well, you've got to spend less, but...
That's the level of service.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Puller, and then Nandor.
Good afternoon, everybody, staff as well. Hi, Nandor. First of all, thank you very much to the CFO for that balanced budget view graph. That is probably one of the easiest graphs I've seen that's been presented that shows our debt position. And when we're talking about the 3 years to the 6 years, you can see very clearly that the longer it is, the longer the debt is going to remain with us. My question is actually around the assumptions, and I know who knows what's going to happen globally and with central government. So when the inflation and interest rates get adjusted, and I know you've got a statement in there that says they don't necessarily correlate to being able to do the same with the rates up or down. With the graph that you've got, are you able to input that into that model so that we can see a bit more of a real time per quarter on how that might be adjusted?
You probably could do it quarterly, but you don't. You set the rates once a year, so you're only doing it annually. You'll be able to see it. So we've acknowledged that interest rates have reduced and inflation factors, cost escalations have reduced. That will mean that that's the savings that we've kind of identified in the paper. So you could reduce the rates required from 12.7% down further to offset the cost escalation decreases and the interest. But it's a philosophical question. Do you want to use it to pay the debt instead?
All right, thank you.
Councillor Puller.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just following perhaps on from your thread and Councillor Dennis's, would it be fair to say, Bevan, that our necessary or essential BAU just isn't covered by the rates, never mind anything else? And so that's why we have to borrow, isn't it? So we're between a rock and a hard place, I guess.
Correct.
Councillor Tanchos.
Thank you. I've got some debating points, but I'll make those when it comes time for debate. I have three questions. So the first one is, and let me preface it by saying thank you for a really excellent report. I think it really makes clear to us some of the financial issues we face, which haven't always been presented so clearly. And I think it's really helpful for us to see that so that we can really start to grapple with some of those issues. My first question is, it seems to me that we started to incur an operating deficit around COVID, but it was quite small. And it's really this term of council when that operating deficit has expanded so drastically and put us into what is actually quite a big hole when it comes to debt to finance operating expenditure. Would that be fair, that this is this term of council where really the decisions have been made to borrow money to pay for operating expenditure?
Yeah, that's correct, and those were decisions that were actually, I think, resolutions. But you got to think also, you know, the level of inflation and cost escalation over the years following COVID hadn't been experienced in a long time. So that's one of the big contributing factors. And so without having the opportunity to have levels of service discussions through annual plan processes, it's very hard to make large-scale cost reductions to offset that.
But I mean, it's how we responded to those cost escalations, right? And I know that we'd be in an even worse position, except that at the annual plan, where we came off of that 3 years of rate smoothing, we agreed to actually increase the rates slightly above what had been promised to rate smoothing, and that was only narrowly won. And in fact, if they had gone the other way, we'd be in quite a worse position still.
Yes.
All right, thank you. My second question is it fair to say that, you know, the things that often are pointed to in terms of cost saving, like Rex Morpeth, Mitchell's Park and whatever, that those are predominantly capital expenditure, and in terms of funding operating deficit, they're pretty negligible, really?
Yeah, that'd be right. So the operating impacts will have a one-to-one relationship with in terms of rates reduction, whereas CapEx, as Your Worship had mentioned before, was around 7 or 8 million, which will have the corresponding 1% rates increase in the following year. I think it has to be 14 million in the year you spend it to have a 1% rates impact, and that's just the way we fund things.
I suppose my point being that there are no simple answers to this, that there's no, we can just cut a couple of our big CapEx projects and that's going to sort us out, because it won't, because those aren't really what's creating the operating deficit. My last point was really, given that we continue to be in a pretty uncertain global environment and national environment. We've interest has eased off a bit, inflation has eased off a bit, but as I noted last time we had this discussion, we've just had Trump elected into the White House. We've got ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which is getting worse and worse. We've got continued instability in Russia, Ukraine, and a number of other factors, so that really right now the wise course for us financially would be to be really prudent and I would argue to pay down debt as quickly as possible, because large debt's going to leave us exposed to global conditions. I suppose there's not really a question, is it?
No.
Any further
Thank you.
questions? Can I ask, you've heard the government's announcements and the things that they have said they expect us to do. How do we respond to that? That was just one of the things that they've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, those announcements have only just come out, and I think that those announcements will have to shape the way we approach our budget in February of next year as a council, and that'll also start to shape, what our work program might look like and what our council agendas and work program might look like over the coming year. But yeah, I mean, we can't avoid it. It is something that is going to have to go into our decision making. But at the end of the day, the councillors are decision makers, and our decisions come from the majority here at this table. But yeah, they'll certainly be featuring from our February budget. and our workshops that'll commence in February.
And one of the things they've taken aim at is the four well-beings. And that determines the scope of what you try and do. So you could argue that there's a one-to-one correlation between what activity you want to conduct and the amount of staff. I would argue that that's not a one-to-one correlation. I think you can do more with less people, that people can work in more efficient ways and all the rest of it. But de-scoping is one way of reducing the expenditure side, right? Would that be fair enough? I mean,
Correct.
You're talking about basic services which we can't slice and cut and dice them, and that's where we are, isn't it? That's the problem we've got. The rates actually don't cover just the basic stuff. I mean, you can say, oh, well, let's not pick up the rubbish. Sorry, let's not pick up the rubbish or things like that, but we can't go there, really.
well, we're sort of asking questions, but anyway, we'll get to the debate section. Councillor Boynton.
Kia ora. I also just want to acknowledge what the other councillors have said in terms of the presentation of the report, and just want to also note that RGNZ has come out to say that transparency in regards to rating and how that is done for our wider public is probably one of the key things to our wider community being able to understand how this all works in terms of knowing how to value some of those key assets that we invest in that serve for many generations. And it may be labelled as vibrancy, but it also provides a massive amount of input into our community and leadership. Many of the community groups that we have are part of being able to bring in the funding and income to be able to ensure that we have other services available in our community that the council doesn't have to pay for. But I just want to acknowledge the transparency in the report and how that you've explained it. My question is around recently the government has indicated rates capping. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but if we were looking at these options, how would rates capping impact on our council?
I'm not too sure exactly what the government has signalled around rates capping. That's different to the rates capping we already have. So uniform annual general charges are capped at a maximum of 30% already. We worked through that in quite detail, I think, in the 24 annual plan and probably through the LTP development that fixed charges impact those that are on in low value properties more than variable charges or those with capital, based on capital value. So we've made decisions through our rate setting processes around the level of fixed charges, which all caps, to try and make sure we come up with a balanced rating number and rating figure that we think is affordable. I haven't heard, as I said, I haven't heard the detail around what the government's proposing in terms of new caps. There's been conversations around setting rates for three waters at certain levels of household incomes and that sort of stuff. So I think we've just kind of got to wait to see what comes out from central government and ensure that we take that into account through our planning processes.
Great, thank you.
If I can just respond to that, because I was at the sector meeting when rates capping was, or Steve and I, the conclusion I came to was, at least, I mean, Steve might have a different view, is that it's largely irrelevant for us because there were two Australian speakers talking about rates capping, and their councils get direct cash contributions from federal government. So unless that were to happen with us, then the rates capping would seem to be nonsensical. Would that be a reasonable conclusion to take away from what we heard?
Yeah, it wasn't really apples with apples. Also, the way that they funded their infrastructure was quite different. And then you have the state and local thing. But actually, another thing they talked about consistently between the two was that actually rates capping in the long term wasn't working for either of them, and that they were selling assets to fund operations, and they were closing or only opening facilities for an hour or two a day, staffing things with volunteers, that type of stuff. So what they were saying is actually you still need the revenue, but because we can't charge for it, we're having to reduce the levels of service and sell assets to almost like a diminishing point, which was quite interesting. But I suspect what councillors will find is if central government does want to explore rates capping further, there'll be a lot more information coming out to the general public around some of those case studies and situations, because I'm sure there's probably some situations where it has worked. But the two very different examples we had from Australia down at that meeting seem to be really struggling with it.
Thank you for that explanation too. I think because a lot of our whānau would probably think, oh, that sounds like a quick solution. So to be able to hear the explanation of that is great. Thank you.
I'll ask another one, if I may. You have obviously looked at the staff costs as a function of time and in relation to revenue, and I've been fiddling around with this plot for quite a long time. And you can see that it was relatively flat between 2012 up to 2017. So we're going like this, and then all of a sudden it turns the corner and starts heading up. And would you agree that if that just kept on that trajectory, we would hit, eventually all of council revenue would be consumed by staff costs? Now, what the ultimate drivers are could be things like what you're actually trying to do. People have talked about some compliance costs and health and safety, and there's a bit of that in there. But we've had compliance costs over that period that it was flat, and health and safety, which has been going on the whole time that I've been around anyway. So all of a sudden the curve kicks up. So continuing on that trajectory is simply not sustainable, because eventually you'll consume all of council revenue for staff to do things, and that really those things are covered by this big umbrella of the four well-beings. So how far along this curve are we going to go?
There's a lot in that question.
Well, it's kind of fundamental.
Yeah. I'll try and do my best in week 4 of the role.
I believe we're going to have the FTE discussion at some point.
We're certainly going to have the FTE discussion. I think if you go back to 2012 and look at the peaks or the changes since then, they'll be correlated to bringing on additional services or bringing in-house services. For example, the Parks and Reserves mowing team, I think, at some point, and I'm not too sure whether it was Section 17A triggered process, which requires us to look at whether we're in-housing or outsourcing activities and looking at options to collaborate with other councils. That sort of came in post all of the amalgamation conversations. So those trigger changes to what we do and how we do it. Most of those large changes will have come through by council resolution at an activity level. So a business case would have been prepared, presented to elected members, saying that we provide this service by outsourcing to contractors. We think it makes better business sense to bring these in-house, and this is the full business case for it. Over time, we lose track of those decisions and the rationale for them, and so sometimes you can see a large number or a large increase and not correlate it to a change in level of service or how we've changed as a business to respond. So I think, there's probably been quite a number of changes if you go back to 2012 in terms of how this business functions and what it delivers. Some of those will be driven by compliance and regulation. A number of them will be driven by efficiency and business cases, I think.
I mean, there was a time, was there not, when almost everything was in-house. And that was when the FTE level was flat. Councillor Puller?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I guess there's some other factors there too that we need to be conscious of, because it's maybe not only the numbers increasing, but the wage rates have changed as well over time. And so that's a cost that we can't avoid in some ways, because you're paying what you have to pay in the competitive market, I guess. So there's probably other things that we need to consider. It's not just we're piling a whole lot more staff on, I think.
Yeah, I didn't quite finish my bit, but anyway, I've lost my train of thought. Councillor Isles and then Councillor James.
Well, no, if you want to finish your line of thought, because mine was following on from what you had started, so.
Oh, no, you carry on.
Again, the Mayor raises a good point, and I'm just wondering what sort of work it would involve to give us a bit of an indication as to where things have gone. I mean, if I go back to 2004, the Mayor of the day then was hell-bent in literally selling off all in-house services, and it was to have concluded with the sale of the Parks and Reserves, which didn't eventuate. But I hear your point about how costs have sort of been absorbed, and okay, we've got something like 30 various businesses going on under the roof. My question really was coming back to the table of the capital expenditure variances that you've indicated here, and the conversation that you say will have to be had, or the work that has to be done prior to coming back to us in February. We've already, actually, by looking at a lot of this here, we've reduced the level of service already, haven't we? Because we're not going to be able to undertake a lot of the transport connection costs because of the fact that we've lost subsidies. How much of that work that's in there now, yeah.
I think what I fear you're getting to was around level of service. I don't think anything in here is going to trigger reductions in levels of service. I think from memory, we proposed in the LTP that we would like to increase levels of service within the transport team, and there was in that transport activity, and there was some rationale around bringing IP in-house, creating savings from consultants, looking at opportunities to create asset management centres of excellence, working with our neighbours at Portakea and Kawerau, and maybe potentially even having conversations around state highway network maintenance. So what this may have done is just reduce it back to keeping the levels of service the same, since it's been renewal focused rather than improvement focused.
But then again, we've got no indication, excuse me, from this government as to what those subsidies are going to be like, say, in the following year or the following 2 years of this particular government, have we?
We've got the full 3-year program approved, but we don't know what's going to happen with the next general election and what happens as a result of that.
Right. So I guess where I'm going there, it could well and truly impact levels of service going forward.
Yeah, I think their approach is to focus on maintenance, and they want to make sure our roads are in better conditions.
Yep.
So the level of investment that's going into rehabilitation, resealing is more than what we've had historically. What they have foregone is improvements to levels of service, so a lot of the low-cost, low-risk improvement program. So even if they didn't change their stance on that, you would still be able to maintain the network. So you wouldn't see a level of service reduction, you just also wouldn't see any improvements in areas, or, new shared use paths, that sort of stuff. I think the other one which might be a risk will be footpaths, because I think all of the maintenance for footpaths has been stripped out, renewals. So if that doesn't come back in the next triennium, there may be some levels of service concerns around footpaths.
The maintenance of special purpose roads, that's something that's borne entirely by central government anyway, isn't it?
Yes.
I was just going to add on quickly to that sentence. You know, we talk quite generally when we say increase or decrease levels of service, but also it's just remembering too that when we're talking about that, there are different stages or levels in the hierarchy of a level of service. So we can increase or decrease a work program right through the spectrum to actually just removing or adding an entire service altogether, whether that's a project or actually a function of council. So, yeah.
Councillor James?
Yeah, just going back to the FTE question, because it's one thing to say, oh, we need to reduce FTEs or our salaries, our salary bill was getting too high, but have we actually got a figure for what our salaries and our consultants' fees is, what the total is?
Yeah, we will be able to separate out consultant and costs within other operating expenditure.
Because I mean, it's easy to cut FTEs, but if we're bringing in outside consultants and it's more costly, which has happened in the past, and
Yeah.
it's not only in this council but nationwide, it's false economy. Isn't it?
You're worse off because consultants are generally more expensive and you lose the IP and the understanding around how the activity functions and the connection to the community. So I think, you know, you've got to have a level of service discussion if you want to have an FTE discussion.
I've actually got those numbers because I got them off our previous CFO for consulting costs. So I think it was, the last number I had was 2023, was 5.7 million, and it's kind of tracking, if it's ratioed to revenue, then the line is flat. So 5.7 last year, so it's roughly been consistent. So, you know, if we're spending 20-something odd million in salaries, we're spending 5.7 million in outsourcing. But that comes back to the thought that I was having, and that was that we thought that in-house was good and that we were, I guess, sustainable. Then somebody decided that, oh no, that's not efficient, so we better outsource. And now we're saying, oh, but outsourcing is no good, let's come back in-house. I mean, this was a kind of ideology or something driven thing. I don't think any of us, I've worked at universities, for example, and then we outsourced a lot of stuff. It didn't help, actually, it was worse. Personally, I like in-house, but, you know, it's not where we ended up going as a country for some reason. But anyway, that number was 5.7 million.
Just to follow on from that then, to get too hung up on FTE numbers is, it's not too clever of us.
We're getting to debate, so I guess it was me that mixed it up by having a comment, but I was just trying to clarify the thought I was having before. Is there any other questions or clarification? Councillor Puller?
Just following on from what you were saying just then, Mr Chair, if you think back to the outsourcing of city care doing our mowing service and all that sort of stuff, that just became a circus because they just didn't do the job. And you lose control when you've got outsourced, so we better to try and keep it. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Well, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here now. Any other questions of clarification? Right, so we have on the table a set of recommendations, motions. I think staff are really asking for some direction on this, and this is what this group of recommendations is really all about. I think we can take it all in one lump. If anybody's got any objections to that.
Well, it depends which option you're going to go for. They haven't actually named a option that was preferable, so we have to name an option.
Yeah,
So I'd like to move option 3.
okay.
These things we're talking about, we're going to discuss.
We're going to decide, we're just going to have a debate. If we get a mover and a seconder, we can go into debate and then we can land on an option. So we have a mover in Deputy Mayor and a seconder in Councillor Puller. So we're in debate, guys.
Might just move them.
Is it easier if we go around the table than just about?
Dear God.
Yeah, we can do that. All right, you're first.
Gosh, I always make this mistake, don't I? First off, I'd like to thank staff. I did actually ask for the hybrid option last time. So it's probably going to be a surprise that I'm actually going to say I'm going to go for option 2. I originally was definitely going down the hybrid option, option 3, but upon listening to everything and reading the paper again with a little bit more information than we had at our briefing, my rationale for that is that it's pretty well stated in the report, but my main motivation is that it reduces the repayment term from 25 years to 10 years so that the future ratepayers aren't required to fund the current rating shortfall. It accelerates the progress towards a balanced budget by reducing long-term reliance on borrowing, reduces the likelihood of further rates rises further down the track. And we did actually already signal that there was a rates rise in the LTP and what it was going to be, so it won't be a surprise to the community. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
I'm on option 3, reducing rates as well as reducing the operating deficit. So a bit of each.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor James.
I'd be happy again with option 2 and try to keep our debt down as low as we can as quickly as possible.
Councillor Dennis.
Option 3, I see that the people need a bit of rate relief, even if we just get below 12%. But I also do see the benefit of reducing debt, and so I'd like to see a bit off the rates, but the majority off the debt, for the same reasons that Councillor Jukes has said. But yeah, option 3.
Councillor Puller.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm in favour of option 2, and as has already been mentioned, we've already signalled that rate, and it makes prudent sense to reduce borrowing and return to a balanced budget sooner rather than later. It also allows a bit of rainy day stuff, which we don't have. Low rate increases in the past have put council in this position today, and it was false economy, as we've already heard. And I mean, we have to, well, I put my hand up because we agreed to it at the time, but it hasn't worked out. So we're not the villain nor the hero, but we're courageous because we're going to make the tough decisions going forward for the benefit of the district. So option 2, thank you.
Kia ora, so I will be looking at this. There is still a lot of uncertainty, and the things that we are clear on is the debt. But in this time, in this landscape of uncertainty, I would be choosing option 3. Both it is for the best of both worlds, some rates relief and some reduction in the operating deficit, and still be able to reduce the mind the gap loan inside of that. So I'll be choosing option 3.
I'm going to take on board what the GM of Finance has told us, but again, I also think that, we went out to consult with the LTP and the preferred option was option 4, that that aligns with the community preference expressed during consultation with the LTP to close the funding gap in the medium term and ease the burden on rates. The hurt is still out there. They still need to have an easing of the rates. Financial situation is tough, not only from a central government point of view, but from a local ratepayer point of view. And you'd only have to ask the businesses around the town as to how they've been affected leading into Christmas. You listen to Parliament yesterday and you see the actual deficit and the fact that we are again in recession, and the light at the end of the tunnel, well, there doesn't appear to be any for at least another year. And again, I just feel that I don't want to go back on a promise that we made. I'm split between 3 and 4.
Well, you can't have it both ways, councillor.
Okay, I'll go for 4.
Okay.
Oh,
Councillor Boynton.
Oh, thank you. For me, it actually does say in one of the options you can have it both ways, but or that there's benefits of one in option 3.
Messing up my table.
Yeah, and it's option 3 for me is what I will be supporting. I understand and I do see the benefits of option 2 in terms of being able to reduce debt. But similar to Councillor Isles, I understand the pressures that are out there with our whānau, and also to what they had to do, not what they had to deal with, but having to face the rates that we set previously. And also, it's good to know that some things are coming down. However, those benefits may not be flowing directly to those whānau who are in desperate need right now. And I believe we need to listen to our whānau. It has been consistent from our community, from our public, the anguish and the struggles that they have been facing. We have also heard it from our business community, even our sports organisations, our Māori land trusts, and I believe we need to listen to our whānau on the ground, and so I'll be supporting option 3.
Thank you, Councillor Boynton. Deputy Mayor.
Oh, yes, thank you, Your Worship. When I first read the paper, I was wavering towards option 3. In light of the discussion and some of the reality check, I'm in favour now of option 2. It was already signalled. There's no doubt that there's some hurt out there in the community. But, we were given a hospital pass from previous decision-making about extending our debt. And all we will be doing is passing it on to the next incoming council and decision-makers. And I just think in this instance, we need to really get the debt under control with all the mind the gap deficits that we've inherited. And we're not Santa Claus. We can't be all things to all people, and we're in these seats around the table to make the best prudent forward decision making. So I know the short-term pain will continue, hopefully for a longer-term gain.
Thank you. Councillor Tanshos.
Thank you. I've always been against borrowing to pay operating expenditure. I think it's poor financial decision making and is a road to disaster. And I think it's fiscally irresponsible for this council to continue to defer getting on top of this problem. We just had the Whakatane Action Group come to us the other day, and one of the strong points I think they made was the unsustainability of having this kind of operating deficit. And I think we should pay attention to that. And I'd also make the point that it's us who got us into this position. It's not anyone else. It's this council sitting around this table right now, which has created us this problem. And it really concerns me that we're going to continue to kick the can down the road because we don't have the fortitude to really grapple with the problem that we've created. And it's just like in the Three Waters space, it's the same thinking that's got us into the problem in the first place, which is this unwillingness to really address what the actual costs are and fund them properly. And so we keep trying to create, as it's been described, this artificially keeping rates low. We keep trying to kick the can down the road, and it doesn't do us any good as a council, and it doesn't do our ratepayers any good because it puts them in a worse position in, than what they'd have been otherwise, because it locks in bigger increases in the future. It locks in debt that we have to continue to service and pay for. And to me, it's just extremely short-sighted to not be doing everything we can to get on top of this operating expenditure. So I definitely support option 2. We've announced what the rates is going to be in the LTP. So all we're doing is sticking with the rates that we've already described. I certainly wouldn't support putting them up more, but I think the idea of sticking with what we announced is the right one, and using the opportunity to improve our long and medium term fiscal position, because actually that's what's going to benefit our ratepayers the most.
Thank you, councillor. Oh yes, it's me. Well, I'm in option 3 because I think that it depends how you view affordability, because on the revenue side, there is really only one source of revenue, and that is the community. Government grants isn't a big chunk of it. 70% is ratepayer funded. And my evaluation of affordability for a large swathe of this community, a 30 or 40% odd, is that you can't get blood out of a stone. So I'm in the 3 camp, and that makes 5-5, and Andrew, who's out on 4. So unless you want to reconsider,
I'll reconsider.
we're split between.
Yeah, I'll reconsider. It would be option 3.
Okay, so we've landed on option 3, but it's sort of a fuzzy line between 2 and 3, I suppose. So would you say that you've got some idea on that now? You're all right with that? Okay, so the next thing to do then is actually debate. Now that we know where we are on the options things, not much to debate.
Not today.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've already had it moved and seconded.
Yep.
All those in favour?
All right.
All right.
Against? The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
So can I just ask what you just moved? Did you just move the 2 bits that are there, or did you move option 3?
Well, what we've moved is that the council, the staff have been given the guidance that they've asked for.
Okay, thank you.
It's a sort of fairly even split. No, but it's what we have. I think we all see it both ways anyway. I mean, we all appreciate that the debt cannot be dragged on forever. Option 3 is the virtue of giving some relief, but but it also does amortise some of that debt. Councillor Tanchos. Oh, well, we've already voted on it anyway, I suppose.
Thank you. I'll just make the point in answer to Councillor Dennis as well, that from the way I've read those recommendations is we haven't actually made a decision. What we've done is we've given an indication to staff.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what those motions are all about. Councillor Puller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, are we asking staff, because it's quite close really, 2 and 3, are we asking them to just review both or just the one?
We'll be preparing the budget for February based on a mixed model where there's some, if we have got some savings, we'll be chopping some off rates, but we'll also be putting some into savings and presenting that in front of council in February. Is that correct, Bevan? Is that your read? Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess we could be here for quite a while debating the same sort of thing, but I think you've got what you need, right?
Yeah,
Now.
absolutely. And the real decisions are made in end of February next year on the draft budget and what we do from there.
It'll be interesting too, by the end of February, as to where the economy's going. We might have a better view of where we're at. And I just want to say that you know, I see why people voted for option 2. I've never believed in debt in my own life. I built my house mortgage free. It took me 15 years, but I got there. And I understand that level of debt, but why I chose option 3 is I just think they need some
The
relief at this
affordability
stage, and the majority for the eliminating debt. So I just want to thank everyone for their options and for what they said, because we're all right, really. Thank you.
I'll just follow on as well. I mean, option 3 was a bit of both worlds in a sense, and it was some form of compromise. So I do acknowledge option 2 as well, and mihi to the staff for their work and being able to present such clear information and options. Thank you.
I mean, you know, it's worth mentioning that, you know, things can still move around between now and when a draft budget is presented. And I hope we can look at this FTE situation. I don't know where we'll land, but it needs to be revised. And scope also needs, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things, over time the scope has broadened, more and more things are being done. And well, the guidance we're getting from central government, and I think it could be more than guidance the way they're going, but anyway.
Exactly, Your Worship.
They're coming in fairly hard.
Yeah, and when they've come at us and said we've got to get back to basics, it should be us then, would be pushing back to them and saying, well, you're landing this on our plate, you review.
Well, I'm constantly on
I know
that
you
sort
are.
of thing. I think our government's really an abrogation of its duties, because it's really trying to put the hard lifting onto us while they step back and wait. So, you know, waters is your problem, you guys go and sort it, but we're not going to do anything. But I think what they probably will do, wait till things go to hell in a handbasket and then come in and save the day and say, well, let's consolidate New Zealand into one council or something like that.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, who knows where we're going? We'll find out in due course. If we can now move on to section 6.2, pages 20 to 24 of the agenda, and that is an item called Mayor's Task Force for Water. So I'm going to speak to that, am I? Okay. This is not unrelated to what we're talking about above, in the sense that we're trying to do a lot of things with not enough money. And, you know, there being a limited revenue side of this equation determined by what the community can handle in terms of rates increases. When it comes to the provision of water, I maintain that it is really a lot has got to do with engineering and technical issues about how you provide water to large municipalities. And I think that there is scope for thinking outside the box. Often I say, given as a sort of an example, you know, the roof is leaking, so, you know, either you can replace the roof or you can paint a membrane on it. So I happen to have spent 10 years in a country where, you know, there's never enough money, and yet water flows, and you've got to be a bit imaginative on what you can do. Now, this community has, well, I can't believe I'm saying this, because I was at first fairly much against things called citizens' juries. So what do we need citizens' juries for? But as it turns out, I found out that there is a lot of expertise out there in water. I mean, we've got some large mills around which have got large water treatment plants. We have, you know, other commercial entities that are dealing with wastewater. So the idea of leveraging community experience for doing some sort of brainstorming and out-of-the-box thinking to try and get us more bang for the buck. I mean, it's not guaranteed that any new ideas will come of this, but if you don't get the right technical people in the room and put a technical lens on things, and it's community-based, I think that I've seen also, I wasn't a believer in, say, the climate change steering group, but the gentleman to my right convinced me that we needed to go there, and I now heat some humble pie and say, well, it wasn't a bad idea. So this is a kind of a version of that, except that with this narrow focus on water and leveraging community experience. And for example, I've got 3 or 4 engineers already teed up who are prepared to give their time, and these are people with 30, 40 years of experience in these fields that possibly recently retired, some of them are still active, and they can come here and make a significant contribution to what we do. It's an advisory group. It's not there to make any decisions, but you never know, they might come up with something innovative and something different, which enables us to save on costs somehow. That's the hope anyway. So the idea was to set up this group and see what it manages to conjure up, if anything. It's also sometimes useful to get some of those negative voices around the table so that they get to see what we're dealing with. They'll be out there coming up with all these ideas, and then you've got the critics. So I'm not averse to having the critics around the table and say, here's what we're dealing with. You can come up with a better thing, then that's great. So that's kind of really what it's about. It'll be fairly kind of relaxed in terms of, terms of reference or whatever. It'll still be as a council entity. We could have done it completely outside of the council umbrella, but I think it's better to have it in. And it will complement the program steering group on compliance issues, so they might feed into that as well. So, yep, that's what it's about. Any questions? The report was not written by me, but I think it's quite good. Yes, Councillor Isles and then Councillor Puller.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, that was going to be my question. What is the point of it, or how would that information be absorbed into what is already happening? And I see that the recommendation is just that the council notes that the chief executive will be establishing an advisory group. When you were saying you've already got retired engineers that could be how big?
Interested.
Well, interested. I thought I read in here where it was going to be limited to, I think it was 6, wasn't it?
3.
Yeah, it could be 6. We'll see. That's just a rough number, but it depends what we find out there. At the moment, I've got a handful of people who have expressed interest.
Okay. Is there a time frame around it?
No, I think we want to kick off as soon as we can, really. But obviously, January is a fairly dead month, so nothing much is going to happen then. I would say we start with a first meeting, and the first meeting would be perhaps a briefing to these folk and say, these are our water schemes. We'll describe what they are and what needs to be done, and then they'll come with their. So.
My other question was also, will that be reporting back to council?
Yeah, it'll provide advice to council. That's how I see it working. Or through the normal channels. It might go through the IMP committee and then, yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Paula, did you have one?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions, really. We've got a good team around us. So I just wonder, is this an overlap? And I know sometimes it's good to have another set of eyes. And the second part of that is they really will have no delegated authority, will they, as a group? Is that how I see it?
They will provide advice, but because everybody comes from a different context, they will have different views to what our internal people are. Also, I think you've got to challenge all views, and they would hopefully do that too. It's always good to have diversity of views. Thank you. The Chief Executive wants to slip something in.
The technical advisory group worked really well for the climate change strategy review. They were specialists in that type of science, and they were able to review, assess, and then provide information and insights back into the climate change strategy project. So it was actually quite useful, and I think for this group it will have value as well, because around water there are different aspects, and I think we have a number of the bases covered internally with staff, but actually having that external lens and that independent lens around the science of water would be very useful. So having that technical side and that science side, reviewing things that are coming out from government. We're still not certain about timeframes and what that looks like, particularly around the water standards, but actually having a group of that type of expertise, providing some insights back into the Water's Done Well planning group, I think would be really useful.
I just can't help wondering whether the energy would be more spent trying to save our hospital services rather than another body. But anyway, that's another story.
Well, it's better not take on too much, but I've got something to say on that. I'll tell you later. I mean, just to supplement that before I hand over to Councillor James, is we got an example. I don't know about you all, but we had one Mr. Philip Jacobs who came and presented to us the other day. I mean, he's a guy with a lifetime of experience in accounting and accounting IT type stuff. And I guess he presented some stuff that made me think, so that's good. And so if we get a bunch of people with expertise in water around the table, you never know what it might throw up. But I'm a big one for brainstorming type things, and this might be it. Councillor James.
Yeah, just reading the report, it seems predominantly aimed at drinking water.
Oh,
to a
not
certain degree, wastewater. I don't see anything there about expertise on stormwater.
No, but it would encompass all of those things, actually, all the three here.
Yeah. What about, would it be worthwhile having someone with a financial background in there as well? Like they might be able to contribute as well.
Well, some of the people I have in mind are kind of project managers, have been project managers in big big outfits, and so they would come with some sort of, they've got to run big projects in major industries. Then you've got to have some sort of financial nous.
To a limited degree.
Well, you can't have it. I'm trying to keep it sort of focused on thinking outside the box, but yeah, it's a possibility. Councillor Boynton?
I just have a couple of questions. First of all, will there be somebody who will be an expert in Mātauranga Māori? Mātauranga Māori is considered science, and particularly in the areas of when looking at water and managing water systems and the historical nature of the current area. Will there be an expert on that panel?
I can't tell you who's going to be on it, and I really don't want to give any names. But if in there, I will let you know who's expressed an interest. I think you'll be quite impressed.
Well,
In that direction.
Well, because you mentioned diversity, so just being able to answer that. My second question is, will
It's
there?
appropriate for me to mention names because all I have is an expression of interest. So it's better that I don't say anything.
I'm just asking if will be a place on that
Could be.
for Mātauranga Māori, because that is a science. Also, will they have a clear understanding of local government, but also too of the initiatives that are currently being done and solutions that are being sought amongst other councils? Given that we have been given a direction to work closely or partner up with other councils, will that information then also be used, or will they have a clear understanding of that, just to ensure that we're falling in line with a certain direction rather than coming up with advice that might be not connected to those parallel work that's currently going on regionally and nationally?
Well, before you can do anything, you've got to do your homework. So these people will be charged with doing a bit of their own homework. But some of them seem to have, some of the people I have in mind, like I say, all I've got is maybe an expression of interest. I haven't got anything confirmed. They have got a reasonable idea of what's going on around the district. In fact, it always surprises me how much some people do know.
I just wanted to be clear so that we're not ending up with advice that is in contradictory to all the information that we've received because we're working at a wider level.
They will have to get abreast of what
Thank
we're
you.
actually doing. Yeah, Nando, Councillor Tedros.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, just to say that I'm generally really supportive of making use of knowledge in the community. I think it's often an untapped resource, and there's a lot of knowledgeable and wise people in the community who we could make good use of. So I'm supportive in principle. A couple of questions. So the group will be chaired by yourself?
It will.
Okay, and in terms of costs of I understand that the people will be volunteering their time. Is that what you've got in mind?
Yep. The people who have expressed interest know that this will be unremunerated. Oh, a cup of tea, and some cookies, whatnot, maybe a meal.
Yeah.
Virtually.
And then our
Well, what I
staff will
think
be
is
servicing
neat
the
is we
committee.
can get our hands on, access to people with, huge skills and at no cost. So, anyway, it's an idea. And
Just the cost of servicing the committee. Yeah.
it'll be somewhat experimental, right? We'll see how it goes. I think it's certainly worth a shot.
Yeah. My other question was, it kind of came off Councillor Boynton's question around expertise in Mātauranga Māori, and you've kind of said you're not really in a position to name names. But so I'm wondering, is the membership of this group, are these people who are kind of handpicked by you? Is it an open membership? If councillors have suggestions of people who might be on that group, or some kinds of expertise that are worth putting onto that group, are you open to that? So I think in terms of Councillor Boynton's around Mātauranga Māori, if there was someone who she knew, for example, who would be really useful to be on that group,
Open to suggestions, but I will share what I know later on with Councillor Boynton, and I'm sure she'll be happy.
Okay, but just in terms of the kind of the process, so they're basically your selected people, but we can offer up ideas?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I just, okay, yeah, thank you.
Councillor James, and then Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, I think Councillor Tandros has sort of touched on what I was going to ask is, who has the final say on who makes up the committee,
Well, actually, we already talked about that, but I presume me.
but not full council?
No.
No, that's right.
This committee, yeah.
It's been pitched as a mayor's task force, and Victor has taken the onus on himself to arrange the members, develop the research review program, manage the agenda, all of that type of work. But thought it was prudent to put the concept in front of councillors. Yeah.
Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, because I'm pretty well around. I have to send for whakaaro what both Nando and Tony have about your proposed establishment of a group of local technical experts in science. We, as Māori, see Mātauranga Māori on an even plane, so it'd be good for you to say science in Mātauranga Māori. Secondly, I see this as very, and this is my own view, I support the concept in principle. It's very mayor-centric.
Sorry, what's
Well,
centric?
you're proposing the establishment of the group, you're proposing to be the chair, and you're proposing the terms of reference. I thought that, within the group, you might want to share that with everybody else within the group to see how they feel about who's going to chair that group. But I do support it in principle. What about, my question is, what about shared service? I mean, you got SMEs over in regional council, and that's their expertise, are some of them, in the water space. Can we utilise some of their people? And I'm sure that they will contribute, those people, and their input for your service.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'm
Something to
not ruling
consider.
anything out. Yeah,
And I mean, that's us working with them together.
yeah, that's
All right, that's,
possible, yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Mayor Luca. In principle, I agree with what you're trying to do. I just think there need to be some checks in there that it is an unbiased group. And I just have a few concerns because we're already aware that of Maratā Sewage situation, where we've hired the best experts in New Zealand, and we have the people in our own area, and we've done numerous amount of testing. At your request, we did a peer review through ESIR that stated we were correct, and yet you still don't agree with it. Now, I would not like to think that this group would be there to prove a particular person's case of why it shouldn't be when we know it's desperately needed to safeguard, to stop the removal of 95 houses. So as long as it's unbiased and as long as it comes up with some good facts, then I think it's a good idea, but it's got to meet those criteria for myself. Thank you. I just don't want to see opposing the views of the council and other experts. Thank you.
Yeah, well, if you know engineers and whatnot, they're supposed to be objective and unbiased. That's the whole thing. Councillor Boynton.
Just to follow on from Councillor Dennis, now that it's clear, that who appoints them, but
We just to add to that, terms of reference, I didn't work out any terms of reference. That's.
oh, no, I was just talking about who's appointed.
Yeah.
I'm just following on from Councillor Dennis' point around bias, and those who may be placed in the advisory group if they have had a. I mean, I understand it's good to get people with differing views, but if they have been very disparaging of not only council members, or have had in the past made commentary that was not only biased or may have been racist, is there any screening of those members?
Well, I don't think we've thought about that really, but I'm happy to put the membership when I've got something in front of people and say, is there anything that rings an alarm bell here? How about that? Does that sound reasonable?
I'm just putting it out there, just because also too we have to be able to manage that. If we have an advisory group that has had people who've made known statements regarding either race or other things that council have done.
Do you know who was on the climate change steering group?
I
didn't pick those people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, look, I'm happy to put it on the table and let you
Okay, thank you.
have an input. That's not a problem. So, if there are any last questions before we... I'll move it. Do I have a seconder?
Oh, just a comment. Sorry. I was just going to make a comment just before we finish that. I wonder if some of the concern is that some of the organisations we've seen kind of outside of council, like the Whakatane Action Group, have become de facto Victor Luca election campaign teams. But I don't think that this is that at all. I think this is quite different. And as an advisory group to council, I would expect that the mayor would be quite careful to make sure that it acts in a really professional way, and I'm sure the members will want to do that anyway.
Just to straighten you out there, Councillor Tangshos, Victor Luca doesn't even know who's on the Whakatane Action Group, to be honest.
But you talk to them regularly, I'm sure.
No, I don't, actually. The only person I've spoken with recently is sitting at the back of the room, and it comes as, and probably only in the last few weeks anyway. So the others, I don't even know who the membership is. I did present to them once, but if you asked me to write a list, I wouldn't know. The Whakatane Action Group has its own mind, I believe. Well, we're off the topic here, I'm getting told. So we have a move and a second. All those in favour? Against? Sorry, the seconder was Councillor O'Brien.
Are we voting on both or one at a time?
I think we're just taking it all together. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was doing. Do I need to repeat that, or? We're voting on both? Yep, all those in favour? All those against? Was that an against or in favour? Councillor Tanshos, were you voting in favour?
Oh, I was voting in favour.
Ah, okay, all right, thank you. I think we have to do one more thing here today, and that is the item 6.3. I refer to pages 25 to 27, the deferred item. So I need a mover and a second of the council notes that due to the continuation of audit, 23-24 annual report will not be adopted at this 19th of December council meeting. I have a mover in Councillor James, seconded Councillor Puller. Anyone have any comments? Councillor Dennis.
Just the reasons for this obvious is the Audit New Zealand. Is this out of our hands, the fact that they are so late and need so much stuff to question us on?
I can probably speak to that. No, and yes. So, Audit New Zealand have been challenged from a resourcing perspective, so they had to combine an interim and final audit at the same time, which is reasonably unusual, and that's due to resourcing constraints, and I guess for a number of councils who adopted LTPs later than normal. But we also have a role to play in making sure that the audit process runs as smoothly as possible. What I can say is that we are probably 99% there. So we'll be working through this week to make sure that the adoption process goes as smoothly as possible in the new year. I didn't want to get into an iterative process where we're sending documents back that we haven't fully QA'd. So it was done in the best interest of making sure that we're not doing heaps of back and forth and incurring a lot of audit time and potentially additional costs.
Thank you for that. And we do note that you're only in your fourth week as a CFO, and so you've picked up the ball and you're doing really well. So thank you very much for that. And it's probably understandable our side of it, but for the fact of Audit New Zealand, the saga just goes on and on, doesn't it? That we're always late getting our audits back, and it's always because of resourcing problems. Is there an alternative?
At the moment, there's no alternative to an audit process, but I think local LGNZ does have some thoughts around the level of auditing of the sector, and I think they are working on some thoughts.
Thank you.
Councillor Boynton.
Just to ask, this has been happening also with other councils currently at the moment, so it's just a phenomenon from what's flowed on this year. So Whakatane District Council isn't the only council in which this is happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, there are no further comments or questions. All those in favour? Against? The ayes have it. That's the end of our meeting, folks. I'll ask Councillor O'Brien to close with a karakia.
Kia ora tata. Kia unui tata. Kia taunga manaki tangata mea ngora i runga i tēnā mātou kia mahai ai te runga mā ki hiki. toi te kupu, toi te ngona, kai a toi ngā tikanga koe ia, te whakairihia he whakawā te haume, hui e tahi, kia ora whana.